Good afternoon and good morning to, and good evening maybe to those who are joining us online. My name is Neno Kukuric, and I'm going just in a few words to open this best session of the venue. And the most interesting, of course, it's about groundwater and then even transboundary groundwater. Can you imagine that? No, you can't. At least you can't see it. So, you know, that gives us additional challenge. This session is part of the seminar, which is called Water as a Driver for Peace and International Cooperation. Don't get scared. And it is dedicated to groundwater, to transboundary groundwater. Now, there are a lot of examples where water, surface water, serves as a platform for international cooperation. However, there are very few formal agreements set up exclusively around groundwater. And one of the reasons for that groundwater is invisible. So it's not really easy to explain the problem. And also it's not easy to motivate public and decision makers to solve or try to mitigate a problem. It's similar, as Kevin knows very well, with solutions, because solutions for groundwater, unlike solutions for surface water, are invisible, and often they take much longer to become effective. So a lot of challenges. 20 years ago, and I look now at Sonia in UNEC, we didn't know much about transboundary groundwaters globally, but then UNEC, UNESCO, and the others started to assess transboundary groundwaters globally. And nowadays we know quite a lot where transboundary aquifers are, but we don't know sufficient where this, what is the state of transboundary aquifers, and especially its qualitative state. Quality. More about that you are going to hear immediately in a first topic of this session, which will be dedicated to, which will introduce transboundary aquifers and their role or potential role in international cooperation. I mentioned already a couple of times surface water versus groundwater, but in practice, those two go together, and they're hydraulically connected and need to be managed conjunctively. That's the reason that our second topic of this session will be on benefits of conjunctive surface water, groundwater management, and again, for water security and international cooperation. Finally, in the third topic of this session, we would like to present and discuss current state of international cooperation of transboundary aquifers. And the session will be, so it will be outcomes of SDG reporting. I think that SDG 652 on transboundary water cooperation is familiar to all of you. Current arrangements and TBA cooperation mapping. I will stop here and give the floor to moderator. No, to moderator, and that's Professor Gabriel Eckstein, and he will introduce presenters and panelists. Thank you. Gabriel, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Neno. Thank you for all of you for joining us here today. I'm Gabriel Eckstein. I am a law professor at Texas A&M University and also the immediate past president of the International Water Resources Association, which is a international non-profit professional membership association. So basically, water professionals our members, and we facilitate networking, facilitate exchange of information, facilitate these kinds of exchanges, and we're really pleased to be partnering with all the others here that I've put on this session to do exactly that, to share information. We've got experts going to be speaking to you all, but we're looking also for you to contribute, whether it's questions or comments, and we'll have time to do that. We're going to start off with Alfonso Rivera, who's the chairman of the International Association of Hydrogeologists, the groundwater guys, the Transboundary Aquifer Commission. That's what he's chairing, and he's going to talk about the role, or maybe potential role, of transboundary aquifers in the international cooperation. So if we can have Alfonso.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Gabriel. I hope you can see my presentation here. You do. Okay.
Just need to switch it to presentation mode. Perfect.
You see it. Okay. So thank you so much, Gabriel. Once again, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation. So to kick off this first topic, I will talk about the potential role of transboundary aquifers in international cooperation. And to do that, I have chosen these three sub-themes, if you wish. I will first tell you about the implication for water security based on groundwater and aquifers. And then how we understand invisible transboundary aquifers, basically on the assessment as a catalyst for cooperation. And then my last sub-theme will be the role, of transboundary aquifers in international cooperation, seen through the scope of a three-pillar framework. At the end, I will give you a few of take-home messages so you keep in mind, please. Right, nowadays we hear and we watch the news and we read the internet everywhere that anthropogenic climate change is the major humanity crisis. I dare to say today that that is not the case. Anthropogenic climate change is not humanity's most urgent crisis. Rather, I'll say that freshwater and food crisis is looming. See, the water scarcity crisis intensifies the need to share groundwater resources. Thus, cooperation becomes crucial to avoid conflict. Because of its resiliency and its long-term storage, groundwater becomes the strategic resource for water security because it's omnipresent. It is everywhere. Nearly all freshwater on Earth actually is groundwater. And during long, long droughts, groundwater is the only fresh water available. So groundwater and aquifers then represent a great opportunity for international cooperation. Consider these numbers. There are currently identified 468 transboundary aquifers, that is groundwater, versus 266 transboundary watersheds, that is surface water. Now, as the assessment of transboundary aquifers continue, opportunities for international cooperation increase. Now, let me show you this briefly. Let me show you this map of the world with the 70 largest aquifer systems located across all continents, recently published by Jan van der Gaan, 2022. Now, when you see those large blue spots across the globe, you can easily imagine the distribution and the importance of groundwater in those aquifers. Now, those aquifers were selected based on their extension, on their groundwater reserves, their use, but most importantly, on the benefits to humanity and ecosystems. Now, those aquifers are very important because they play a very important role as a source of water, because together they cover a very significant part of the continents containing huge amount of freshwater reserves. Now, I took that map and then plotted this graph that you see here, and I took some of the map of the aquifers that you saw on the previous slide and added others not as large that are not on the list from Van der Gaan, put them in here. I then classified them into 5 categories based on the scales ranging between tens to millions square kilometers. And that is also because of the importance that they have. Even if they are not large, they are extremely important. So the 5 categories that you see here range between the local scale, which is very small type of aquifers, 10 to 100 square kilometers. Then you have the intermediate scale, 100 to 10,000 square kilometers. A regional scale will have areas, the aquifers will have areas between 10,000 and 500,000 square kilometers. Then a very large scale with aquifers having areas between 500,000 and 1 million square kilometers. And then finally, the mega scale, very large scale, any aquifer having areas beyond 1 million square kilometers. Now, in doing this exercise, I found that 65% almost, these 10 aquifers indicated with arrows are transboundary. They are shared by 2 political jurisdictions or more political jurisdictions. Now, I had to say that not all of them have been studied, which to me represents an incentive to cooperate in assessments whenever the aquifers are transboundary. Right. Now, second theme, understanding invisible transboundary aquifers. That's what we heard from the first 2, and for the first speakers, Neno and Gabriel. So groundwater is invisible to the naked eye. We know that, we don't see it. But it is ubiquitous. It is stored in transboundary aquifers for millennia. And it becomes visible where it sustains ecosystems, maintains the base flow of rivers, and provides water for agriculture and domestic uses through wells. Now, transboundary aquifers are shared across political boundaries. Transboundary groundwater transfers from one country to others. And shared management of transboundary aquifers requires understanding both the aquifer's structure and the dynamics of invisible groundwater in it. Thus, I like to say that assessment of TBAs has an intrinsic cooperative value by making more visible a results that is invisible. Having said all that, and I'm going to jump into my third and last theme, and unfortunately, groundwater is often absent and seen as a valuable resource from national strategies, policies, plans, and governance of water resources. Now, the global attention and importance of TBAs are accelerating the visibility of transboundary groundwater into binational arrangements, shared international policies, and shared management and governance. I would say that the last 10 to 20 years or so have seen an important increase in international cooperation on transboundary aquifers and transboundary groundwater. Just to name one, the ISAR networks created by the International Association of Hydrogeologists, UNESCO, and other partners. So making groundwater more visible. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which you will hear later more on this, have further enlarged the visibility and the cooperation of groundwater. Now, when 2 or more countries agree to jointly assess a TBA, then a plan is designed to protect the shared groundwater for all. Also to identify and support opportunities for societal and economical benefits in balancing multi-jurisdictional international interests. Thus, TBAs clearly play a role in international cooperation by exchanging information in support of each other's goals. Further, the use of the ILC draft articles on the law of transboundary aquifers is underpinned bringing parties together. Now, multi-stakeholders dialogues facilitate advancement of TBA's cooperation by exchanging information, as I just said. But when we adopt a TBA three-pillar framework, as shows on the right-hand side, will allow a conflict-free joint governance of the TBA towards its equitable and sustainable use. And you can see here in the triangle, the feedback between the 3 vertices. So the assessment of TBA, which is not only the physical assessment, it also includes socioeconomical, geographical, and even cultural, geopolitical, the cooperation and collaboration mechanisms and shared management. So in this manner, we think that cooperation increases the chances of being successful in solving transboundary aquifer issues. So these are my 4 take-home messages, a very brief presentation, of course. I would say that common TBA assessment generate good neighboring relationships and diplomacy. Multi-stakeholder dialogues facilitate TBA's cooperation by exchanging information in support of each other's goals. So this is the 3-pillar framework that I just showed. The use of the International Law Commission on the draft articles on the law on transboundary aquifers bring parties together. Finally, you will hear more about this shortly. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals have further enlarged the visibility and the cooperation of or on transboundary groundwater. Thank you so much for your attention, Gabriel. I don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Yes,
thank
okay.
you.
So I was saying thank you, Alfonso, for this great presentation, and I find it interesting that as you presented this from a starting a little bit of not too technical, but where they are, which are the particularly large transboundary aquifers, but then you moved into the policy and into the law, which was really helpful because we are now going to move on to our 2 panelists, both of whom are jurists. We've got Laura Movia, lecturer from University of Vigo in Spain, and Francesco Sindico, professor at the University of Strathclyde Law School in Scotland. So if we can get them on the screen here. And as I said, both of these are jurists and both have worked with transboundary aquifers, groundwater resources, water resources in general, in various forms, and have quite a bit of experience. So I'm going to start asking you a couple of questions. Yep. As to be expected, always a few little technical issues come up. And Neno's putting on his dancing shoes, right? Just in case. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay. We didn't have to suffer for that. All right. Welcome, Laura and Francesco. So let me start. Both of you, maybe Laura will go first. Alfonso said that freshwater is he identified as one of the most challenging issues globally, maybe even more so than climate change. And I wonder what. And I want to turn that around. What is the driver for peace or for cooperation? It is that we know it's a challenge, but what would make it? What aspect about transboundary aquifers, water, would create a driver for peace? We'll start with Laura, please.
Thank you, Gabriel. Good morning, everyone. It's a very good question. And in my opinion, I think especially if we look to the lessons that we have learned so far on transboundary aquifer cooperation, and especially if we look at the very few agreements and arrangements that we have on specific transboundary aquifers, I think that the main driver for transboundary cooperation, transboundary aquifers has been knowledge. Because as Alfonso said, for a long time, groundwater has been invisible. So we need to make it visible. So first of all, we need to know it. If we have a transboundary aquifer, we need to know exactly its extension, if it's in fact transboundary, how it works, how many water there is there, and so forth. So I think the very need to improve the knowledge on a transboundary aquifer that is going to imply joint assessments and so forth, exchange of data and information, is a driver itself for cooperation, because states, for instance, are going to need to talk to each other. And in fact, most of the few agreements that we have on transboundary aquifers, they were concluded precisely to deal with exchange of data and information, to continuous monitoring of aquifer and so forth. And once we have the knowledge, that acquisition of knowledge is also a driver for further cooperation. We also have the experience of some projects dealing with aquifers. For instance, the project on the Guarani aquifer previous to the 2010 agreement, or the Greta project, that have helped states to increase the knowledge on the transboundary aquifers they share, and they have worked as a platform to begin cooperation or booster that cooperation that was already working a little bit. So I think knowledge is going to be the first driver for cooperation in the future also, and knowledge, and then we can look also to the legal knowledge, not to the technical and scientific knowledge only. For instance, I also think that draft articles on the law transboundary aquifer has been a driver for transboundary aquifer cooperation. So the dissemination of that legal instrument, for instance, has already been a driver for cooperation. So we need to continue increasing the technical, scientific, and legal knowledge around transboundary aquifers.
All right, thank you, Laura. Francesco, I want to pick up on something that Laura said in terms of knowledge being a driver. From a legal point of view, when you think about agreements, whether they're formal or informal, is there particular knowledge that you, as a lawyer, somebody that might be involved in negotiations or drafting these agreements, what kind of knowledge do you think would be particularly important to conclude that agreement, but also what might be particularly effective to achieve cooperation?
So first of all, thanks for inviting me here. And it's a pity I'm not in Stockholm with you. I have fond memories of the World Water Week. But going to the question, I think lawyers in this sphere should be very humble. We need to work with hydrogeologists. We need to work with water managers. We do not have all the answers. So the first skill that we need to bring to the table when the two parties or more are willing to start a conversation around the legal technicalities is actually not to do it alone, but to do it with the likes of Alfonso and other colleagues in the room who know much better than me and Laura the scientific intrinsicies and complexities of the aquifer. But you then ask, what makes all of this effective? And I'd like to just maybe say a few words there, because just having an agreement doesn't mean anything if there's not an understanding around it and political will to actually make it do something. Finance is incredibly important and everything. So there's so many pieces to the puzzle in order for it to be effective. And also, every aquifer will be somewhat different. In some areas of the world, a legally binding instrument, a treaty, will work better. In other parts, actually, a non-legally binding instrument, soft law, if you want to call it like that, may actually drive more cooperation, while something very, very hard with enforcement may stifle innovation and interest for that cooperation. So I cannot give a one-size-fits-all answer. You really need to look at the specifics. But really also what is important is what Neno asked at the beginning, how do we make this visible, this invisible natural resource? I'll stop there. We cannot hear you again.
Oh, cannot hear? Can you hear me? Okay, so what I was saying, that what you were saying about the groundwater being invisible, and maybe, I don't know if it's especially transboundary aquifers, but certainly any kind of aquifer, but from a policy and law perspective, from a management perspective, why have transboundary aquifers in particular, and especially maybe cooperation over these types of aquifers, not been more visible on that policy level, on the international agenda, maybe on the national agenda of countries? Why has it not been part of the agenda when we talk about water, when we talk about SDGs and so on. It seems that it's groundwater and especially transboundary aquifers are sort of relegated off to the side. Let's start with Laura again.
Well, thank you, Gabriel. I think it's due to several factors. One is, of course, that invisible nature. If we don't see something, it's more difficult to worry about it. That's why knowledge is so important. So, and why all these assessments that are being carried out right now are so important to increase that presence of groundwater also in the national and international agenda. Also, in this case, we don't have, for instance, a strong legal framework for the governance of this resource that usually in other environmental fields we have. In practice, they are more or less useful, but we have more visible legal instruments, framework instruments, or even some institutional structures to deal with some environmental issues or other resources. And here, as you know, the most important instrument that we have is the draft articles on the law transboundary aquifers, that it's, as Francesco say, somehow soft law. It's not a binding treaty. It's a guidance for states. So I think that does not help either to do not have a strong reference at the international level. And at the same time, it also reflects that it's not a hot issue at the international level. So that's why I think and also linking this with what Alfonso said at the beginning of his presentation, that he was talking about climate change, we need to connect this issue with those hot issues at the international level. We need to highlight the importance of groundwater in relation with climate change adaptation and mitigation. And we need to highlight the so important ecological support function of groundwater and try to link that with those other issues like as climate change or biological diversity that are also there in the global agenda. I think that's very important because groundwater is supporting all of that, and we need to be aware of that. I think that's one of the main points I wanted to make.
So I just want to ask one quick question to Francesco, and then I'm going to open up the floor for one or two questions. But Alfonso and Laura and you, Francesco, you've all raised the draft articles. And if you can, in just a very quick sentence or two, explain what they are and where you think they're heading, because if I'm not mistaken, are they on the agenda again of the General Assembly coming up? So if Francesco, if you can just give us a quick synopsis.
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, they are, as Laura said, they're not legally binding. They are guidelines that states have agreed to back in 2008. They provide a general framework of cooperation. They provide a normative framework around exchange of information, a number of environmental provisions. And what they really do, a bit like what Laura said, they provide a starting ground for conversation if two or more countries want to discuss the future cooperation. But, and I do want to give the floor to the audience, Gabriel, but if you allow me, I think we have to be careful not to put one huge crisis against the other. It's not about climate change or groundwater. It's not about one thing or the other. It's about, as Laura said, connecting the dots. And I also think that the reason why, and let's just climate change as an example, the reason why climate change is so high on the agenda is because there's an interest from almost every country in the world, from youth, from civil society, from government and business. So I actually think that the question that is posed from Neno at the beginning, how do we make transboundary aquifer more visible? We need to ask ourselves a number of questions. I do have the answers, but I'll leave the floor to the audience. But the questions are very important. Visible for whom? And I highlight again, it could be youth, civil society, government, or business. Why do we want to make it visible? The answers will be different depending on the three categories that I just mentioned. And how? And again, there will be different answers. But all of them, if you think about them carefully, bring to that connectivity, to that raising the profile, both from a little kid to a CEO of a company that relies on water. If we don't achieve that, if we're not more strategic in the groundwater transboundary aquifer community, it will always be a second-hand degree crisis, if you want to call it like that. So I do think those big questions, which in a way are not even legal, but actually end up having a huge legal implication at the end. I'll stop there, Gabriel, and I'm happy to have an engagement with the audience if there is any.
Thank you both. If there's one or two questions from the audience that you'd like to direct at Laura or Francesco. Yes, please. If you can give us your name, affiliation, and your question.
Sure. Hi, I'm Suku. I'm a member of the Young Scientific Program Committee for World Water Week. And my question is, I guess, to either of them, but Francesco mentioned that a legally binding instrument is not necessarily the way to go, or may not work for every transboundary basin. And we had a discussion about this earlier with other people about how the metric in the SDGs for transboundary cooperation is having an agreement in place. So I'm curious, how do we then move to measure cooperation? Because I do agree that it's not necessarily a one size fits all. So what are some of those other options, and what's the better metric to measure that cooperation? Is it even quantifiable to begin with?
Thank you. Laura, Francesco, one of you wanted to take that on?
I'm happy to start. I think there will be speakers later in the session that will answer much better. But I think the last point of the question, is it even quantifiable, is actually a really important one. And I think rather than giving a number to the effectiveness and of whether it's an agreement or not, I think you need to look at the bigger process. I mean, is the fact that there is in this case, an SDG indicator, is the fact that there is a monitoring, reporting, and verification system, is that per se driving cooperation in a specific country? I don't have the answers, because in a way it could be different for every country. But I do think, rather than getting stuck on, does it have to be an agreement with 4 parts, and does it have to have a dispute settlement system and so forth, it's more about the bigger picture. We're starting in many countries from very, very little knowledge. And let's be honest with ourselves. It's not just about least developed countries or developing countries. A lot of so-called developed countries still don't have a good grasp of their groundwater resources, of their transboundary aquifer limits. So this is really a global issue. If these metrics can promote even just a little degree of cooperation through exchange of information, I see that as a positive thing. If the effectiveness is based on we all have the best possible water quality and water quantity, well, that's a different issue. Laura.
Regarding the question on not binding legal instruments, as Francesco already said, that they can be very useful in some contexts. That's why we need to adapt to every transboundary aquifer and its surrounding circumstances. They have advantages. They are less formal. For instance, they can be agreed between subnational entities, not necessarily between states. And maybe the cooperation is easier at the subnational transboundary level. Sometimes the authorities are less reluctant to agree on something that it's more informal, that something that is going to be binding and going to have, they are going to have responsibility if they breach their obligations and so forth. So I think they can perform a very important role depending on the circumstances of each aquifer. And coming back to the SDGs, I know that other panelists in this session are going to talk about that, but if I'm not mistaken, the indicator measures operational agreements and arrangements. So I think they don't have to be necessarily formal binding agreement as far as they meet some requirements that I'm sure other speakers are going to talk about them. Just to say a little bit about that.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Francesco, for joining us and participating. And we're going to move on now on our agenda with Kevin Peterson, who's a research fellow with the University of Western Cape in South Africa. And we'll be talking about transboundary aquifers and river basin organizations, exploring the benefits of conjunctive surface water and groundwater management for water security and international cooperation. Yep, yes, yep.
And the focus here is on river basin organization, because that seems to be the implementation modality through which a lot of transboundary aquifer assessments and governance is taking place through. I wear a lot of hats, but the hat that paid me to get here is the Southern African Development Community Groundwater Management Institute. I'm also, I call myself a pseudo academic because I work mostly in the private sector, and I'm also co-chair of the IAH TBA Commission. So the issue of transboundary aquifers and aquifer boundaries are a very interesting discussion and discourse that is taking place. So recently I was involved in delineating the Eastern Kalahari Karoo transboundary aquifer, which is basically an aquifer transboundary aquifer system between Zimbabwe and Botswana. And we kind of redrew the boundaries of the aquifer system. And normally transboundary aquifer systems are contained within river basin organizations. But in this case, what we had was basically that this particular transboundary aquifer system basically, dissected two river basins, which was the Okavango River Basin and the Zambezi River Basin. And this basically introduces more complexities in terms of how you would then consider transboundary governance of aquifer systems and how would you deal with it. So the IAH recently developed an overview of river basin agencies or river basin organizations and groundwater, and I was part of that process. And some of the key messages that came out of that process in terms of our engagement with river basin organizations, of course, from a groundwater perspective, we want to say that groundwater bodies are of critical importance to the management of many river basins systems. I think it's important also to realize that groundwater systems are storage dominated and completely different to those of surface water bodies. So those kind of distinctions we need to understand, and also what are the economic and ecological services associated with groundwater system. So I already mentioned the issues of transboundary aquifer systems and crossing international territorial boundaries and the complexity associated through it. And I've mentioned that it seems to be that RBOs are the preferred vehicle for implementing groundwater management access. So this is work that UNESCO did, which basically succinctly kind of ties together what are the benefits of conjunctive management. So why do we want to do it? And I think the whole issue is that conjunctive management of surface and groundwater takes advantage of the connection between surface and subsurface hydrology and their different storage capacity, dynamics, and other properties. So it makes more resources available for use and lower the risk of water shortages. Also, the whole issue of water resources sustainability, particularly from a groundwater perspective in terms of attempting or trying to prevent groundwater depletion. Of course, there's environmental benefits, economic and social benefits. But what I like to highlight is this whole issue of double counting. And basically by looking at groundwater surface water conjunctively, looking at the holistic resource in one way, and you kind of understand how the system behaves. And I think that is important message that we need to understand. Frequently, we look at groundwater surface water in isolation, and you basically overestimate the resources available. So this is just an example of conjunctive management in terms of which type of strategy you can use, where you can use it, for example, for drought cycling, for seasonal cycling, understanding where you would use groundwater resources, when you would use surface water, and how you would use it within the cycle. So I'm from Cape Town, which basically went through the drought, and 20 years ago, we advised the government to say that you need to implement conjunctive use, but as we were not very successfully, unfortunately, because the way we see the aquifer system working is, when does Cape Town need water? When during the summer months. So during those months, you would use groundwater more than surface water, and winter months, you let the aquifer rest to artificially or recharge. So it's those kind of mindsets that needed to be introduced in terms of how you would see conjunctive management of water resources. So from our perspective, some of the priority actions needed, we obviously need to start understanding our system. We need to understand the interaction between surface water and groundwater systems. The RBOs need to establish the spatial configuration of groundwater bodies in the landmass of the basins and their relation, as I've said, with surface water, but also with seawater, obviously dealing with the issue of saline intrusion. So we need to develop a clear overview of how groundwater is being managed nationally and locally within their catchment area. And also there needs to be harmonization of groundwater monitoring within those areas. So how are we trying to do it within SADC GMI? We're trying to establish a baseline data. We're trying to understand the system, and this we're doing through the transboundary diagnostic analysis, which basically identify all the key issues. What this mechanism does, it brings the countries together. It brings people together. It brings us together to speak about common issues. This we then transition into a joint strategic action plan. And again, it's joint. The emphasis are in joint. So it's all about cooperation. And you'll see primary monitoring systems in all the studies we've done. The number one issue is that we do not understand the system. So we immediately develop our understanding of our in terms of establishing a monitoring system. This results in key actions, and then basically results in terms of how do we do investment planning in terms of realizing the key actions that is taking place. So we need to transition from baseline studies, from developing plans in terms of how do we support infrastructure development, how do we support food security, how do we protect our water resources, and monitoring becomes crucial here also because we all obviously need to impact into our system. We're trying to do it on a priority basis in trying to understand which areas are the highest risk through it. So this is just a overview of the type of work that we've done in SADC in terms of transboundary aquifer systems. So I will conclude. My last slide focuses on the importance of institutions, information, enabling instruments, and infrastructure. And within SADC GMI, we're trying to build interventions that support all these aspects. I think I'm done. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin. The issue of conjunctive management and coordinating surface water and groundwater has been discussed amongst hydrogeologists and hydrologists for decades, but not so much amongst policymakers. And this is something that I want to explore a little bit. We're going to have two panelists with us. One is Sonia Koppel, who is here present with us, with the Secretary of the UNECE Water Convention. And online, we will have Abdelkader Dodo, the coordinator of the Water Department of the Sahara and Sahel Observatory. So let me start with Sonia here. In terms of surface water, groundwater coordination and conjunctive management, what do you see as sort of the main challenges at that, I guess maybe at the high level, so policy management level? What do you see are the main challenges in achieving that kind of coordinated management?
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. A lot has been already mentioned over these days today. Firstly, the lack of knowledge, lack of data, lack of understanding among policymakers and even experts. We see that even in developed countries, and the reporting on SDG indicator sigma 5.2, we can see that even many European countries did not have sufficient knowledge about their shared aquifer systems. And that's why the indicator value could not be validated at the global level. But we have also seen that the SDG indicator reporting has actually led to action, like Switzerland. They have actually done additional studies in order to be able to have a value in the second reporting exercise. Another challenge related is obviously lack of capacity. I think there's a lot of good efforts ongoing by UNESCO, IGRAC, IAH, many others, but much more is still needed. Another challenge also mentioned by my predecessor is the fact that surface water bodies and groundwater bodies or aquifers do often not correspond in terms of their surface. That's why it's not easy to manage them jointly. And while we do have more than 130 basin organizations for surface waters, as it was mentioned also already before, we have only less than 10 groundwater agreements and a few more basin organizations who are dealing also, have started to deal with groundwater, but there is much more there's much more guidance also needed, much more good practices, so simply also lack of knowledge and lack of political prioritization. But I would also say that there are some positive solutions which are coming around. As I said already, the reporting on this indicator sigma 5.2 which is jointly coordinated by UNESCO and UNECE, has led to action and not only to additional research, to cooperation between geological surveys, but also to actually countries taking action to establish joint management mechanism for their shared aquifers, such as on the Senegal and Mauritanian aquifer basin, where the countries have started a cooperation process and set up a regional working group. And then certainly here also the legal framework, such as the Water Convention, which I represent, play an important role, because the Convention on the Protection Use of Transboundary Watercourses, International Lakes, covers both surface and groundwaters, transboundary surface and groundwaters, both connected and unconnected ones. And as Nino already mentioned early on, this topic was on the agenda since some years and has become even higher through the development of the model provisions on transboundary groundwaters from 2012, which were officially adopted by the meeting of the parties, and which are being applied in several pilot countries. So yeah, and finally, if you allow me, I think what's also important is that we actually tell human stories, that we actually show, and to me, for example, one very personal event was there's a Geneva Human Rights Film Festival, which brings together human rights people. And last year or the year before, the closing film was the film Marché sur l'eau. I don't know if you have heard about it. It's about groundwater in Niger. And it was really portrayed at the highest level in an international film festival, prepared by Issa Maiga, an actor. And this led to awareness raising among the normal local communities, seeing how livelihoods are affected by climate change and how groundwater is important for our everyday life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonia. So Abdelkader Dodo, you are actually, in a sense, on the ground. You are working with an organization that is helping to manage resources, groundwater resource in your in Northern Africa. And I'm wondering, do you have opportunities to engage in conjunctive management or any kind of coordination in terms of the different water resources that are within your sphere? And what are the challenges that you are facing in that context?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I would like to share my presentation. Do you see my presentation?
Yes, we do.
Okay, good morning. I would like just to answer about your major question, mainly about the challenges. First of all, I would like just to present Sahara and the Sahel Observatory. It is an international organization based in Tunis since 1992. And as you see, we have 26 state members in North, West, Central, East Africa. And also we have countries from Europe, and you have Canada, and you have another UN organization, River Vessel organization, and the NGOs. OCS is working mainly on transboundary aspect, not only water resources, but also we have ecosystem, land degradation, and climate change. OCS is an entity, a couple of entities about GCF and Adaptation Fund, because we try, to facilitate the access of climate fund to the countries in order, to face their challenge about the climate change. As you see, if just I consider the African continent, really this continent has a lot of water from groundwater and also for surface. So you have at least 80 transboundary aquifer system, and at least you have 660 billion, 60,000 billion cubic meter, in terms of storage. But if you consider surface water, you have there as a recharge, you have at least 80 transboundary watershed, and they have 4,000 billion cubic meter per year. It is very, very important. It's good. We have a good budget, but we might face a lot of challenges. I will try really 3 challenges respecting the process. First of all, groundwater, transboundary groundwater system, and the transboundary watershed, they are not completely overlapped, not completely, but you have some interlinkage between the 2 water systems. What this means? For instance, I would like to show in the right hand, an example. The Illuminated Tiny Reserve aquifer system. The area is at least 2,500 square kilometers. You have 7 countries: Algeria, Benin, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Mauritania, as the riparian countries. And this aquifer system, in the red line, as you see, is in close connection with the Niger Basin, managed by Niger Basin Authority. You have 11 countries, you know, and they have the limits about the boundary limit about this watershed. And this is the Niger River, you know, with the Benue tributary, the major tributary. You know, you have not a complete overlapping between the aquifer system and the watershed. What means? For instance, Mauritania and Nigeria, they are not connected by Niger River. If you consider Guinea, you consider Ivory Coast, you consider Chad and the Cameroon, they are not connected with groundwater, elementary aquifer system. But we have an interlinkage between Niger and groundwater, elementary aquifer system. The challenge is how we can drive, how the countries, they know they have overlap between this two systems, but it's not completed. Then the challenge is really we need an current conjunctive surface and groundwater management. This means we invite these countries. You have 9 from NBA, 7 from ITAS OSS part, but Mali, Niger, Benin, Nigeria, they manage both surface and the groundwater. Then we invite these 11 countries to sit down to discuss about that, you know, about knowledge. It is really, really important to know what we manage. We cannot manage well what we don't know. We must make visible the invisible. If you see in the left hand, you have the African continent. And you see, considering more than 80 transboundary aquifer systems, you have less than 10% well completed documented. This means how we can really manage well if you don't know. That we encourage really to develop the knowledge. As you know, the previous panelists said. In blue color, you have what we're doing now. You have the northwestern aquifer system shared by Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, and then you have immediate aquifer system. You have Senegal, Mauritania aquifer system shared by Mauritania, Senegal, Gambia, and the Guinea-Bissau. And both you have the OMVS, OMVG for Senegal River and the Gambia River. You know, all they are working both about surface and groundwater. Here we have in IGAD area, you have 7 aquifer systems, 7 watershed, transboundary watershed. And the country should sit down and discuss about the way, you know, to manage. To do this, we need to know. Then this is the activity we're doing since 2010 about the intermittent aquifer system. And this is a model. You know, this model we developed by PM mode flow. And in the blue line, you have the Niger River. In the tributary, you know, this is Sokoto River, you know, joined Niger River. And finally, the water balance demonstrates that the Niger River, you know, supplies the aquifers, ITAS, by 35 million cubic meters per year. In another hand, you know, the ITAS, the aquifers, supplies the river, Niger River, by 650 million cubic meters per year. What means? The country should discuss about the way, you know, they should manage well in terms of quantity, in terms of quality. This is why we say where modeling works clearly highlight this interlinkage and interdependency, you know, between the two water sources. Then conjunctive managed surface and groundwater is an integral manner, is the best way really for the countries, you know, to continue to work, to manage in the peaceful direction. And finally, we know we have the scientific information. This is an example, but we have also for northwestern aquifer, Sahara aquifer system and the other aquifer system. But this is just an example. And when we have a good information about our water budget in terms of quantity and quality, then we can move to the agreements. We need a formal document, you know, for the countries to know how they can continue to manage by sustainable way. But unfortunately, if you consider on the world, we have more than 600 transboundary aquifer systems identified with UNESCO, OSS, or based on Jeff, how we say, finance and initiative. But you have only seven transboundary aquifer agreements in the world, if you consider the major transboundary aquifers in the world. This means we need to encourage this establishment of the consultation mechanism for transboundary aquifer system in terms of technical and political levels. In another hand, if you consider watershed, you have AMBO, you know, African network river basin. You have in the global, you have the RBO, you know, network, and we need, you know, to encourage for aquifer system and how we can make visible this invisible, because it's very, very important, mainly how to face this negative impact for climate change when you're working in arid and hyper-arid area, such as in Sahara and Sahel area. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation. And very interesting to see how, you know, different organizations engage on the issue of surface water and groundwater, and also the need for more information. As you said, you know, you can't manage what you can't see. And so if it's connected to surface water, but you can't see it, you don't always know what to do with it. Unfortunately, we need to move on with the agenda, and we have another set of speakers, and so we're going to move on right now. Thank you. Christina Fraser is a researcher with the International Groundwater Resources Assessment Center based in the Netherlands, and she is going to talk about the outcomes of the SDG reporting process, current arrangements, and transboundary aquifer cooperation mapping. Microphone, yes, thank you.
Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about some research that we've been doing at IGRAC and understanding how we can better use the SDG data to inform future rounds of reporting and hopefully accelerate progress. So as we've heard a lot today, the importance of water cooperation, specifically transboundary water cooperation, has been reflected in the SDG agenda. And there's a specific target indicator that's been developed to monitor the progress. And this is the indicator 652 that I will be talking about today. So the indicator is designed to track the development of operational arrangements for transboundary water cooperation. And as we've heard already today, an arrangement has to meet 4 criteria in order to be counted under the SDG indicator methodology. So those indicators are that that a joint body mechanism or commission for transboundary cooperation has to exist, that there's regular formal communication between riparian countries, that objectives, a common strategy and action plans are agreed upon by countries, and finally, there must be a regular exchange of data. So it's not simply enough for an arrangement to exist, but it needs to fulfill these criteria in order to be counted. So countries are asked to report on their progress in achieving operational arrangements over each transboundary river, lake, and aquifer that they share. So far, there's been 2 reporting phases in 2017 and 2020, and there will be a 3rd reporting phase next year. And although countries are asked to report on individual water bodies, the overall progress results are given as a single percentage per country, which is calculated as the proportion of a country's transboundary basins that are covered by operational arrangements. And the results from the 2020 reporting round show that the global average is around 42% for transboundary aquifers. So it's clear that acceleration is needed in order to achieve this target. But how can we accelerate the uptake of operational arrangements? Well, in 2020, UN Water announced a new acceleration framework, in which they identified 5 key pillars for acceleration. And within transboundary water cooperation, acceleration will need to include, as we've heard already, increased financing for transboundary aquifer assessment, better monitoring practices and initiatives for cross-border sharing. But it will also need to include, in particular, elevating transboundary cooperation up national political agendas. And therefore, the way that we use past SDG monitoring data to inform future rounds is crucial to acceleration. So the reporting process of 652, while successfully engaging countries in reporting over their transboundary cooperation, is ultimately still only a national quantification of something that's inherently international. Country percentages that are produced by the indicator don't really give us an insight into which aquifers, rivers, or lakes are cooperated over and which aren't. In order to know this, you'd have to download the specific country reports and have a proper dig. So for example, if we take South Africa, their indicator value for transboundary aquifer cooperation is 45%, but that doesn't tell us anything about which aquifers come under that 45%. And it also doesn't tell us if South Africa's neighbours are also reporting cooperation agreements over these aquifers. So the aim of this research was therefore to see if we could use the SDG data in a different way to present an alternative view of cooperation under 652, specifically cooperation per aquifer instead of per country. In doing so, we hope that we'd be able to identify data gaps and provide information that could lead to more directed interventions for the next reporting round. So in order to do this, we extracted aquifer-specific data that was reported on from all of the country reports in 2020 and 2017, which are available online. And we spatially presented the data using IGRAC's global inventory portal of transboundary aquifers. So as you can see from the results, it's much easier to get visually a sense of where cooperation is taking place for transboundary aquifers globally. On the map, we use different colors to represent what was reported in country reports. So for example, if a country reports that there's an operational arrangement over their portion of the aquifer, that's colored in green. If they report that no arrangement exists, that's in red. And then we have a range of lighter green and yellow colors to represent arrangements that aren't fully operational, but might meet some of the criteria, which gives credit to some countries who don't have operational arrangements, but who are actively working towards it. And then we have a series of gray colors for countries who didn't report on the aquifer or didn't submit any data. And presenting the data in this way not only allows us to pinpoint success stories like the Stampede Aquifer system, for example, where all countries involved have reported consistently that an operational arrangement exists, but it also allows us to visualize where countries are reporting different things in order so that we can go into those regions and validate what the actual on the ground situation is. So for example, in the Lake Chad Basin aquifer, Central African Republic don't report that an operational arrangement exists. They consider the arrangement to not be operational because it doesn't meet all of the criteria that's required. And finally, it also allows us to see where operational arrangements don't exist and where countries aren't even reporting because of data gaps, and like in the River Indus Basin, for example. And this is valuable because it can help us direct where intervention needs to be required, where we need to collect more groundwater data and monitoring, and where we need to increase regional capacity development. So other than the visual insights and the impact of presenting the SDG 652 data this way, we can also pull other interesting insights. And for me, the most interesting was that the data is not harmonized. And that's a major issue. Countries don't report consistently over the aquifer that they share with neighbors. This could be caused by countries having different interpretations of what's actually been achieved on the ground versus what's actually written in the agreement. Or maybe it's a lack of capacity or understanding of what actually constitutes an operational arrangement. yeah, we actually showed that in total there were only 10 operational arrangements globally that were reported consistently, with all aquifer countries agreeing, which is a 3% coverage of the IGRAC database. So it's very low. Some aquifers do meet all 4 criteria for an operational arrangement, but no actual arrangement exists. And formalizing this cooperation is a really easy win to improve indicator values, like low-hanging fruit. Many countries, as we've already heard, don't report on the aquifer component because they just don't have enough data and information. And you could see on the map, there's a lot of gray areas, particularly across Asia, for example, where they just don't know and understand enough about the resource to be able to then report on it. So moving forward, in order to accelerate progress, we're really going to have to strengthen the scientific understanding first. And again, the majority of transboundary aquifer cooperation cases do fall under surface water arrangements. And in particular, across Africa, river basin organizations, like we've already heard, seem to be a vessel for transboundary cooperation. But it's often unclear within those arrangements how much groundwater is considered. So for example, they might exchange and meet regularly about surface water, but are they also talking about groundwater? Are they also sharing groundwater data? So moving forward is hoped that presenting the SDG 652 data in a different way will allow countries to see where progress can be made more easily to increase their indicator value, and that can also serve as a supportive tool to the caucasus-codian agencies, UNESCO and UNECE. In order to help direct their own capacity development initiatives and resources where it's needed most. The harmonization issues they need addressed, but first understanding how and why and where they're happening can help us solve the problem. The importance of the scientific baseline can't be understated, and more resources globally are going to need to be mobilized for the assessment of transboundary aquifers globally, but countries are also going to have to take ownership over their own assessment and monitoring of transboundary aquifers in order for it to be sustainably done. Finally, I think that we should encourage others to use SDG data in different ways. Just because it's reported by official agencies in a certain way, it doesn't mean you can't go and download the data and have a play and see what insights you can discover yourself. So yeah, thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Christina. We're going to got a little bit of time left. We've got 2 panelists that are going to be joining us. Maria Elena Giner, who's the commissioner of the U.S. section of the International Boundary Water Commission, which is a commission, binational commission between U.S. and Mexico, and Aurélien Dumont, who's a program specialist with UNESCO. So if we can get both of those folks, great. So let me start with Commission Giner. I know that the International Boundary Water Commission has not engaged that much with groundwater issues in the past, but I found that the map that Christina had on the screen, quite striking. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, I mean, what could help in terms of harmonizing that information, the information that is provided by Mexico, information provided by the United States, so that we can build harmonization and try to achieve cooperation?
So it was really difficult for me to see the map, but there's actually 3 basins where we do have harmonized information that was done in 2009 along the Arizona Sonora border because of the Transboundary Assessment Protection Act. And so this is an effort that was led by USGS funding that came from the federal government to actually start to map and exchange information. So your question is that, how do we move forward on it? I think that a good model was precisely that Transboundary Assessment Protection Act that was very important to doing some of this work. And actually it presented a framework between the 2 countries, and it was about a 3-year long process to develop that framework between the 2 countries followed by the actual scientific work, which is still ongoing. But I would say it took about 5 years to do those those 3 reports and go through the quality control embedding process.
So that takes up quite a bit of time, I guess, to generate that information and to coordinate across the border. Aurelien, from your perspective at UNESCO, you've seen maybe different examples around the world where nations have come together to cooperate and to develop this information. What type of information have you seen that they've been able to harmonize, and in what context have you seen that? And if you have any particular examples you want to throw out.
Yes, hello everybody. So thank you for your question, Gabriel, and also first of all to the organizer of the seminar to have invited me. So indeed, as we saw in the previous presentation by Christina, we can note that a greater commitment to cooperation is needed, since as revealed by the monitoring of indicator 652, action would be accelerated to meet this SDG target 6.5 by 2030, and this is really key, in fact, to reap all the benefits of cooperation. And in line a little bit with your question, we have noticed that acceleration is needed in terms of providing data, knowledge, and cooperation of this on these transboundary aquifers. And in that sense, as you can imagine, this monitoring of 652 jointly undertaken by UNEC and UNESCO as co-custodian agencies is giving some lessons. And in fact, first of all, we can see that an indicator framework allows to measure progress, to encourage also states to take action. This is a step-by-step process. We have several monitoring rounds that take place every 3 years. So we started with maybe little information. Many countries in the first monitoring round in 2017 had difficulties to provide information transboundary aquifers. This has improved during the second monitoring round in 2020, and up to the point that, in fact, we have now more than 110 countries that have reported at least some information or tried to calculate the components for the dedicated component in the 652 transboundary aquifer. So this is very encouraging at the end, even though at the end, when we look at the results or the assessment presented by Christina earlier, we may see many discrepancies and need for harmonization. But we should also recognize that we made a lot of progress to raise this awareness on this importance of transboundary aquifer cooperation, thanks to this specific SDG indicator. And it's related a little bit also to one process that has been a driver for improving visibility and cooperation on transboundary aquifer, as was discussed in the first panel. So yes, definitively for the next reporting round, one of the objectives of the custodian agencies, UNESCO and EC, is really to improve this harmonization, to work more on the basis of the data that we now have to reconcile these discrepancies. And of course, one of the key actors that has been maybe a little bit left behind so far are the river basin organizations, because I think Christina mentioned it quickly that in fact this SDG indicator is a duty from the member states. This is an exercise that is undertaken at national level. We have a national value for the SDG indicator. Of course, we have been encouraging the national authorities to coordinate and to build also on the data knowledge that is sometimes gathered within other institutions, such as the geological surveys or as I was saying, the river basin organization. But now we are seeing that really maybe for the next reporting round that will take place starting to take place next year, 2023. It will be the third reporting round. Well, we have an opportunity there to improve. And in fact, this relates also to this issue of conjunctive management. If we can have multiple objectives by involving better the river basin organization in the monitoring process. As I said, improving harmonization, improving the reporting process itself and the quality of data. But of course, this is not necessarily the end of the story. Of course, by this process also, if, for instance, the statutory meeting of an RBO, a river basin organization, includes an agenda item on the 652 in particular, well, this will allow raising awareness on this on the transboundary aquifers, because the calculation of the transboundary aquifer component is mandatory. So this will allow them to make to have a balance, a view on the situation regarding the transboundary aquifers within their basin, and then maybe reproduce examples that we have been seeing in the past, and dynamics that are taking place, in fact, as we had also before, of more and more river basin organization integrating their groundwater resources and having better care of groundwater resources, as, for instance, in a little bit reproducing what has been taking place a few years ago and under the facilitation of UNESCO in this Greta project, where we had, as you know, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa that agreed to establish a multi-cooperation mechanism to be embedded in the ORASECOM commission, the River Basin Commission, to integrate the cooperation on the Stampede aquifer they shared, the three countries shared. So within the Groundwater Commission, within this river basin organization. So in fact, we see different processes that are really much interlinked topics that are really go together. And thanks to this 652 process, we also, beyond making an assessment of the status of cooperation, we tried also to improve this the status of cooperation and encourage countries and different institution organization to cooperate on transboundary aquifer. So
thank you. Let me just a quick question to Maria Elena Henner. You operate in probably one of the more successful institutions to manage transboundary waters. Is there any lessons there that you can identify that would be particularly important to help build that relationship over groundwater? And I know, again, the IBWC may not have that mandate or may not have engaged with it, but I'm sure there's lessons there that we can identify that could help build relations over transboundary aquifers, so we can then harmonize that information and develop the arrangements, if not actual agreements.
Right. I think that, so first of all, before I answer that question, I did want to highlight that the three aquifers that have already had shared information is the Mesilla, Conejo Médano, San Pedro, Santa Cruz, and we're finishing up Hueco Bolson. But I think that the sharing of information, I think that's been a common theme amongst all of the speakers, is that you can't manage what you can't measure, right? And so the reality is having that information is fundamental, and we've kind of gotten to that point. In Mexico, water is a federalized asset, and in the United States, it's driven by local communities, right? So here we have two very different legal regimes, which they're very difficult to harmonize, because at the same time, in Mexico, communities can't negotiate with their cross-border communities unless they're under the umbrella of the federal government, because those are exactly the framework within which they have to work. I think one of the lessons learned that we're encountering even in water supply is the role of the three levels of government in terms of including them within your decision-making process, right? Right now, we're having historic levels of drought on the Colorado River, as well as on the Rio Grande. And so And so definitely we as the federal government need to share in the cost burden associated with what needs to be accomplished. And a lot of everything that needs to be accomplished needs to be done at the local level, right? So it is this tripart, you know, this 3 levels of government. And I see Jennifer Pitt in the audience. And I see, and so I can see that she would be a good person to really talk about the efforts in the Colorado River and the role not only the local community has, but also the NGO.
All right, thank you very much. We are almost out of time. I want to thank all of our panelists, participants for joining us today and for the great information on groundwater, on transboundary aquifers. I'm going to turn it over back to Neno Kukurik for concluding remarks.
Thank you, Gabriel. And very shortly at the end, I think message is very clear. If you search for peace and cooperation, go groundwater. But even a clear message is, you know, making invisible visible. It's so important to make groundwater more visible. And as you might know, this is year of groundwater, and we had World Water Day on groundwater. There is a World Water Development Report. There's actually a global baseline on groundwater, including very important chapter on transboundary groundwater. And last but not least, we will have a first in history groundwater summit in December at UNESCO, and it will be a special session on transboundary groundwater. So please join us in these efforts. Thank you very much for your coming and attention.